I'm back in New York this week to attend James Suckling's Great Wines of the World. This is always one of my favorite events of the year. There's more than 350 producers from more than 60 different wine regions, and they'll be pouring up to 700 different wines over the 2 nights. I'll be attending both days as a member of the wine media. There's going to be dozens of wines there that received either perfect 100-point scores or 99-point scores, including the Wine of the Year for 2025. In this video, I'm going to share some of my highlights, some of my favorite wines from the 2 evenings. There's going to be a number of different regions and wine styles represented, and wines at a variety of price points. Some of my favorite wines from the tasting were actually wines that I featured on this channel recently, including in the last 6 to 12 months or so. So rather than repeating myself, I'm going to show a brief 15 to 20 second highlight reel that includes some of the photos from those wines, as well as the scores they received from Mr. Suckling. If any of those wines interest you and you'd like to know more about them, please let me know in the comments below and I'll send you the video that discusses them in more detail. In addition to identifying some of my favorite wines from the tasting, I'm also going to provide some insights regarding how I approach this event. This is so because many people have asked me either what wines they should taste or how I approach these events. I can understand why that might be useful, since these events can be a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're attending for the first time. But when it comes to which wines I would recommend, I think the best advice comes from the man himself, James Suckling, who advises as follows.
Many people ask me, oh, well, what wine would you recommend I taste today? That's really impossible. There's so many. It's just a bounty of choice.
The main piece of advice that I have for this event, and for all others like it, is to just have fun with it. You're going to have an amazing time and taste some fantastic world-class wines. But for those of you who want to know, I'll briefly share my thoughts regarding how I approach these events before getting into some of my favorite wines from these 2 nights. I always try to make sure that I get a list of all the wineries that'll be pouring, as well as the wines that they'll be pouring at the event in advance. I go through that list, and then I try to identify a list of must-visits for the event. I'll also have a separate category of maybes that I'll visit if I get a chance to do so. Then I'll come up with a smaller subset of absolute top priority visits. You can choose whatever criteria you want to prepare your highest priority list, but for me, I tend to include some of my personal favorites, also some of the most expensive wines there that I don't get a chance to try very often and that I want to try before I buy. I also try to include some producers that I've never had a chance to taste before that look intriguing or interesting. And I'll also try to include a variety of regions, especially regions that I want to focus on, perhaps because a vintage is particularly strong, such as Brunello de Montalcino for 2021, which was quite well represented at this event. The other thing I'll mention is if you're a fan of champagne and you want to try the champagnes that are being poured, you should definitely do that sooner rather than later, as those tend to run out fairly quickly. Just a couple more quick tips that I found to be useful personally. First, I recommend attending both nights if you have a chance to do so. Some of these top producers, including some that were on my highest priority list, are pouring both evenings, and that gives you additional flexibility. Second, I also recommend taking advantage of early bird entry and paying up for that if need be. I found that you can definitely get a lot more done during that first hour than you can once the full crowd gets in. Just to give you a frame of reference, I'll briefly show you what it looked like at 4 p.m. when I walked in, compared to what it looked like after the full audience was there and things were in full swing later in the night.
There's more than 2,000 people here.
Now for some of my favorites. In addition to some of the wines that I'll discuss in more detail, there were a couple really nice library wines like the 2016 Léoville Lascasse and the 2011 Jablé La Chapelle Hermitage. But since those wines are all back vintages that are in the secondary market, for this video, I'm going to focus more on current releases that should still be available in inventory channels worldwide. One of my highest priority wineries for this tasting was Tenuta San Leonardo. If you're not familiar with this producer, I definitely recommend that you get acquainted with them soon. This is one of the most historic, highly respected producers in northern Italy. Interestingly, they focus on making wine from Bordeaux varieties, and they do an excellent job of it. They have a unique microclimate in the Dolomite foothills that allows them to make intensely concentrated, yet elegant and age-worthy expression of Bordeaux varieties. When I approached the table, I noticed that several other Italian producers had representatives that were all tasting through the San Leonardo wines, so I knew that was a good sign. The 2019 vintage was particularly strong for San Leonardo, and they were pouring two different wines from that vintage. There was a Carmenere that I really enjoyed to start things off, but my favorite was definitely the Vigneti della Dolomiti, which received a 98 port score from James Suckling. This wine is a blend that consists of several different Bordeaux varieties. It was intensely concentrated, yet extremely elegant. While this wine is still extremely youthful and has a long life ahead of it, it already showed impressive complexity, with flavors and aromas that included mixed red and black fruit, subtle smoke, leather, and white pepper. It reminded me a little bit of a Northern Rhone wine, which is definitely a compliment coming from me. The prices for this wine are all over the place, so definitely do your best to shop around and find the best price you can. But I saw numerous outlets selling it for less than $100 per bottle. Since Northern Rhone is definitely one of my favorite regions, that was definitely a point of emphasis as well, and there were several outstanding expressions of Northern Rhone wines over the course of the 2 nights. But my favorite came from Stephane Ogier, namely the 2022 Cote-Rotie La Belle Helene. This wine received a 99-point score from James Suckling, and justifiably so. While this wine is still extremely youthful, it has extraordinary promise and is absolutely a world-class wine. This wine had everything that I was looking for in a top expression of Syrah from Cote-Rotie. It delivered that telltale expression of Cote-Rotie elegance over a layer of serious intensity. A wine that just makes you sit back and reflect and take notice. There were definitely some impressive white wines at the James Suckling event as well, and day 2 started with a dynamic duo of Rieslings, one from Alsace and another from Germany. The Alsace wine came from family Ogier. They had an impressive Gewürztraminer, but the Riesling that they poured was definitely one of the standouts of the entire evening. Ogier was pouring a Grand Cru Riesling from the 2015 vintage. This is their flagship dry white wine, and it was showing extremely well on this night. Much better than it was a couple years ago, so it's definitely gaining some additional complexity with age. This wine featured layers and layers of flavor and an incredibly long finish. There was ample acidity, and it was very well balanced. This is a wine that sells for right around $100 per bottle. Immediately after tasting this wine, I went to the Schloss Johannesburg table and tried an impressive Riesling from them as well. This was the 2021 Silverlot GG. This wine is from the Rheingau, and it's a little bit more intense and powerful than the Alsace expression was. There was also a higher level of acidity as well. This was the perfect way to start the second day of tasting, 2 distinct yet extremely impressive expressions of Riesling. As mentioned, 2021 Brunello was definitely a point of emphasis for me at this tasting, and I tried dozens of Brunello from the 2021 vintage. This is a classic vintage, so it's definitely not a vintage that you want to open immediately. Rather, it's one that you want to put away in your cellar for at least another 5 to 6 years for most expressions. One producer that I really enjoyed that I think over-delivers at the price point is Livio Sassetti. Livio Sassetti had 2 different Brunello that I really enjoyed at this tasting, namely the 2021 Brunello di Montalcino and a single vineyard expression called Molino. These wines received 95 and 96 points respectively, and they sell for right around $60 to $65 per bottle, which is an extremely fair price for wines of this quality. I had a slight preference for the Molino, but you really can't go wrong with either one of them. Seña is one of my favorite producers from Chile, and I've featured that producer many times on this channel before, but it was definitely a treat to compare the 2020 and 2021 vintages of Seña. In fact, Seña was pouring both nights, so I was able to do this comparison 2 nights in a row. The 2021 vintage was one that received a perfect 100-point score from James Suckling, and I can see why, as this wine has absolutely everything. but it is a wine that's going to have a longer life ahead of it and one that needs some additional time to show its best. In contrast, the 2020 vintage was a little bit warmer and drier, and so this is a wine that's more approachable and that you can enjoy earlier on. In fact, I found that it was showing a little bit better than the 2021 vintage, particularly on day 2. So if you're interested in a Seña that you can enjoy immediately, I would go ahead and get the 2020 vintage. But if you want the best of the bunch, and you don't mind waiting a little bit, then the 2021 will be a wine that will reward your patience. Next up is a wine that I never would have identified had it been served to me blind. This is a wine that comes from extremely old vines that are as old as 135 years. There's around 800 of these old vines in a small 1.2 hectare plot in the Barossa Valley. Yalumba uses the extremely complex fruit from these old vines to make an impressive Grenache called the Tri-Centenary Grenache. This was the first time I tried this wine, and it looks nothing like what you'd expect from a Barossa Grenache. It looks more like a Nebbiolo, as the color is extremely pale. This is so because the wine undergoes an extended, light extraction during fermentation. The results are impressive purity of fruit and an extraordinarily elegant wine with impressive acidity and freshness for a Grenache. Better still, this wine sells for around $60 per bottle, and that's certainly a very fair price to pay for a wine of this quality. While my favorite expressions of Assyrtiko tend to come from Santorini, there was an exception from the James Suckling tasting, namely the aptly named T-Oinos, Clos Segasta, Assyrtiko. T-Oinos is an island that's about 3.5 hours north of Santorini by boat, and this expression of Assyrtiko was extremely enjoyable. This was an intensely concentrated wine with layers of flavor. There was impressive salinity and extremely high acidity. There was a long, complex finish. This is a reminder that in the right hands, Assyrtiko can produce a world-class wine. Catena Zapata always shows up strong for the James Suckling events, and this year was certainly no exception. They brought one of their 100-point wines from 2012, namely the Fortuna Terrae, Adrianna Vineyard. This was a deep, brooding, powerful wine with incredible intensity, yet it was also extremely well balanced with ample freshness and acidity. Really an extremely impressive wine with a long, complex finish. While this is not the current release for this wine, and I'm not sure that you'll be able to find this particular vintage, I mention it because the 2015 vintage will be coming out soon, and I spoke with Miss Catena, and she advised that she thinks that one's even more impressive than this wine that received a perfect score. So definitely keep your eyes out for that one. Another extremely strong expression of Sangiovese that I enjoyed came from a producer called Ipsis. This was my first experience tasting their wines, and I was extraordinarily impressed with the wine. It had impressive intensity, but it was extremely elegant. There were layers and layers of flavor and a long, complex finish. It was a very well-balanced wine. It turns out this is a 2021 Chianti Classico Gran Selezione. I didn't notice that immediately because all that information is on the back side of the label. When I asked about that, they said that that was intentional. I looked up this wine later and found out a little bit more about it. This is a fairly new project, and it comes from fruit that is from a vineyard that used to be owned by Banfi, but was acquired by this producer not too long ago. They've been doing an excellent job in making some world-class wines, but I was a little bit surprised to see that the price point was more than $200 per bottle. That's certainly a very, very aggressive price for Chianti Classico, Gran Selezione or not. So it'll be interesting to see how this wine fares in the future. But it certainly was extremely impressive. I'd like to be able to try this wine side by side, perhaps in a blind tasting against some other top expressions of Sangiovese, such as Brunello de Montalcino, and perhaps some others as well. Like many viewers of this channel, I'm a huge fan of Super Tuscan wines, so Super Tuscan wine tasting is always one of my priorities at these events. This time, I found an excellent expression that I think you'll enjoy that sells for an extremely reasonable price point. Michele Sata is one of the original producers in Bulgari, but unfortunately his wines have been overshadowed by some bigger names like Ornellaia and Sassicaia. He does still make extremely enjoyable, impressive, classic expressions of Super Tuscan wines, however. Better still, the prices are extraordinarily reasonable. For example, the 2021 Michele Sata Piastrea Bulgari Superiore sells for only around $55 to $60 per bottle. That's the same price as many of the second wines from some of the more famous Super Tuscan producers. This wine certainly delivers compelling value at that price point. It's structured and polished, well-balanced, and incredibly harmonious. This wine featured flavors and aromas of black fruit, mixed herbs, and spice. There was ample acidity and a long finish. This is wine that certainly punches well above its price point and compares favorably to wines that sell for double the price, if not more. If you'd like to learn more about Super Tuscan wines, please be sure to check out this video that's linked above.
Enjoy wine, great wine forever.